What separates a high-impact leadership program from a ticker-box initiative? This week, we are joined by Sarah Stone, co-founder of Linkable, to explore how organizations can move from leadership development beyond theory and into measurable business impact. With so many organizations now investing in leadership programs, how can HR ensure they are practical, measurable, and genuinely embedded across the business? Welcome to our 2026 series, Through the HR Lens, our comprehensive market update looking at the leading HR trends impacting the Australian and New Zealand workforce. I'm Nan Lazarus, Recruitment Manager in our Brisbane office. As revealed in our People to People Group's 2026 Employment and Salary Trends Report, leadership capability is a clear workforce priority in 2026, with 63% of HR leaders prioritising the development of leaders. Yet, limited career opportunities remain the leading driver of turnover, cited by 37% of job seekers. That gap matters. Organizations are investing more heavily in leadership development, but the real question is whether those programs are actually building the capability the business needs or simply delivering training that looks good on paper. Leadership development cannot sit only at senior levels. To create real impact, organizations need to build capability earlier and more consistently across leadership pipelines. For HR, the challenge is making leadership development practical, measurable, and commercially relevant. It is not just about workshops or theory, it's about embedding the right behaviors, building confidence, improving people management capability, and aligning leadership growth to business outcomes. Today, we are joined by Sarah Stone, co-founder of Linkable, to look at what effective leadership development programs should actually include, where businesses often fall short, and how HR teams can make sure that these programs create real impact. Sarah is an experienced education and capability leader who helps organizations build future-focused learning solutions and supports growth, innovation, and long-term performance. Through her work across culture, leadership, and employee experience, Sarah focuses on creating practical development pathways that connect people capability with business outcomes. Welcome, Sarah, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Lee. Always a pleasure to be with you. Loving to have a chat with you today.
Fantastic. Well, look, a lot of the conversations I have in the market at the moment when I'm talking to HR professionals, they are talking about that leadership development capability program. And a lot of the generalist roles that I'm seeing coming in are requiring that exposure or that experience. Now, having said that, in the same vein, I'm also seeing the market has shifted where we are seeing a lot more L&D, OD roles coming to market. So capability uplift is a big drive, but that leadership development is a big focus at the moment. So with your experience and the work that you've done and the markets that you've worked with, what key business challenges should a leadership development program focus on solving? And how do you align it to measurable commercial outcomes?
It's a great question and something that I often go into an organisation and look at first up. And really it has to be aligned to, if we solved this issue, what would be the biggest lever for us to contribute to the business's strategic objectives or people objectives? So really, for example, it could be reduction of attrition, for example. Okay, well, how do we do that through leadership and really kind of tap into that and be able to potentially put a percentage or a figure around that is achievable to reduce, for example, using that specific example over the program duration or 6 or 12 months post the training program, if it is a training program that is required.
Okay. So when we talk about leadership development programs, is it sort of a one size fits all, or should leadership programs be structured to address capability gaps across different leadership levels from your frontline to your senior?
I think it's definitely a mixed bag based on the customization or what the objective that the organization is trying to achieve. Look, I think invariably it is different. There are different requirements. What I talk to execs about it's going to be different to what I'm talking to frontline leaders about. And however, the thing I would say, Leanne, is that it needs to be threaded through. So if we are working towards 3 or 4 things that we're going to shift the dial on, and what are those biggest levers that we can pull to, achieve growth or those strategic objectives, or, providing succession pathways for our leaders, how do we thread that through? What are the objectives at that exec team level? What are the senior leaders doing? What are we doing with the senior leaders to thread that through? And then, how does that cascade to the frontline leaders, which I would say, as long as we've got alignment with the exec and the senior levels, that middle management, that middle leadership is where we can get the greatest cut through. And I always suggest that once we have that alignment and that buy-in from those exec and senior leaders, that is a great place to start.
I think with a lot of things when it comes to HR, if you have that buy-in and that support and sponsorship from the executive leadership team, you can do a lot.
A life lesson, let's say.
Correct. Now, when you look at sort of the leadership capability, the programs, what core leadership programs should a program build? Because when I talk to clients, and a lot of people say to me, we really need to focus on leadership development because we've got a lot of people in the business that are technically phenomenal at what they do. We put them into leadership roles and they fail. So should the leadership program be on purely soft skills, or what leadership capability should a program really focus on, and how do you balance between that soft and that practical on-the-job application?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it needs to primarily focus, when they are so technically sound or capable, on those soft skills. And, time and time again, it's, delegation, having tough conversations are certainly topics that come up. I think from that end, so it needs to be a mix. However, if we're dealing with an audience who is technically sound and technically capable, soft skills are usually going to have the biggest impact, and they're the biggest lever to pull around shifting the dial. And time and time again, delegation and having tough conversations always comes up as a challenge for leadership groups and those softer skills. I think it needs to be practically mapped, though, a program, whether that's individual coaching or a group session, to how is that actually going to help them from a technical standpoint or a performance-led standpoint with their team. So I think you can weave in those technical skills in scenarios, but really build out those softer skills to have an overall impactful program.
Okay, perfect. Now, when we look at the structure of a leadership program, how do you recommend that HR or line managers actually embed the coaching, mentoring, and real work experiences to genuinely drive behavior change? Because a lot of the time with training, you can train, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there is going to be that behavioral change if we're talking about soft skills.
Agree. And I think if someone is coming to us and asking around a strategy for leadership development, once I know what they're trying to achieve, and perhaps it is a program, I really see the best outcomes being a mix of individual coaching and group sessions to really thread the real key competencies or objectives of the program through those group sessions, so that they're collaborating, the groups are really connecting with each other on what they can learn from each other. But then those individual sessions are really targeted around where that leader is at that time, for where they're at, what their experience is to date, and a plan can be formulated. So you really do have, you're catering to that individual need, but then you're also getting that common kind of language across the group there.
Okay, awesome. So when we talk about best practice leadership program structure, What should that look like? And when I say what should it look like, it more so around, is there a perfect length? Is there a perfect delivery mix? Is there, segmenting against different levels in an organization? What does best practice look like when it comes to leadership development programs? Or is there one?
I'm not sure there's a perfect answer to this. However, I find in my experience that it's better by level. So, an exec development
Mm.
program or a middle management program, but you've got to have that alignment thread that I keep talking about throughout it, so that we're all kind of talking at the end of the day a common language around, what are those big drivers that we can achieve and do as
Mm.
a collective leadership team to have impact. So I don't think there's a perfect answer. I do see when we've tried to do, and over time, more junior leaders with middle management leaders, it doesn't always work out because you've got different varying levels of capability. So if you are wanting to achieve that, then you definitely going to have those individual sessions with the
Mm.
group sessions to really ensure that you're catering to those leaders that have had more experience than the others, to even out that capability. But I think that the more you can get to levels of leadership and targeting what the levers are at those levels, that's where you can really see a lot of impact.
Absolutely. Now, obviously, with any initiative or any program that HR bring in to the fold, there's a cost attached to it. And when you're talking to the ELT, they're always wanting to know what that return of investment is going to be.
Mm.
So, how do you design a program that delivers measurable ROI and sustained impact, not just that short-term learning? What would you say around that?
Think you've got to start again with that end in mind. What are those leaders that you're wanting to, from a metric standpoint or a people standpoint, shift and start there?
Mm.
So if we just moved X to X, what would that mean for the business? What could we invest into? What could we give more development around our people? That type of thing. So from the outset, it's identifying those key things. Now that won't happen unless the right questions are being asked to the exec team, etc. You invariably find that out through discovery what the key levers are.
Mm.
Once you identify those 4 or 5, then it's about how do you measure those things. And I think that's a really good question for any HR practitioner to be asking. How am I actually going to measure these things? And I've seen it before where there's so many KPIs attached to a leadership program that they never get tracked and they just go into the abyss. And it's not really a targeted program. So I think it's going to be,
Mm.
keep it simple, have 4 or 5 things that you're going to measure and track those over defined milestones over
Mm.
time. And it has to be visible at that exec team level around that, and that the leaders are signed up to really embed certain behaviors or development that we're trying to, really shift at each level or grow or develop. And the other thing that works really well is measuring confidence pre-program, mid-program, and end outcomes, or end of program, and at certain points thereafter. And so
Mm.
what we did last year was, we had 26 leaders in an organization and various levels of that, and we picked 4 or 5 key metrics to shift. And this figure didn't hit the bottom line. I want to be really transparent there. However, we measured through reduction of attrition, increased business cases by these leaders of what they were suggesting around innovation, to more senior leaders, progression to more senior roles. That had a one, and we measured 200 pieces of leadership impact from that program. So we keep capturing that as we went, and that had a $1.2 million value creation to the bottom line. It's about 800,000 to the bottom line through reduction of attrition, but the rest was value that could be redirected into other areas.
Look, and I think that's the value add of when you look at that leadership development program, because as you mentioned, there's so many different things that it impacts. You can look at the ultimate bottom line, and if it's a CFO, they will. But you can look at everything from the engagement, the career progression, the engagement, the reducing the turnover. That all adds value, and that's why I think a leadership development program is important, especially building that pipeline as well. So when we look at
Absolutely.
so when we look at a leadership development program, the assumption seems to be that it's HR's responsibility. They're accountable for the success of the leadership program. Do you agree with that, or do you think it's sort of spread between HR, L&D, business leaders, executives, and how should that accountability be enforced?
I think that's a great question. And I would say for the majority of businesses right now, it probably does sit in HR. And I really see it very clearly around where those things should sit. So again, going back to our earlier point, has to be exec engagement involved, and the leaders of those leaders really driving the outcomes at every level that we're trying to impact or are impacting. For me,
Mhm.
I see HR as the guardian or I guess, the framework to make that happen. So, yes, potentially they're engaging an external vendor, the right vendor for them that suits them from what they know the exec outcomes are, or, they want to have happen. And I
Yeah.
do see HR's role on measuring the impact of the program.
Mhm.
Absolutely, they can report up to the exec, but I think the embedding of what we're trying to achieve with the program, whatever that may be, has to sit with the leaders of the leaders and the leaders who are going through the program to a degree to go, what am I actually going to do differently from here?
Yeah.
That's where I see a lot of the ownership.
Okay. Now, I've spoken to people who have been put through leadership development programs, and there can be mixed bag depending on how it's obviously set up and run. So some people go, "Oh, look, it was just a ticker box. They needed to put that down so it looked good on paper
Yeah.
and for business." So what separates a high impact leadership program from a ticker box initiative that fails to deliver real change?
Think it's got to be something that the leaders themselves have been bought into. And where I see that playing out, Lee, is starting the facilitator starting with a one-on-one to really understand personally
Mm.
what the objectives for that professional are and that leader are. That can be supported by diagnostics like your DISC, your MB, your HBDI, etc., as a really good lever to start going, or a 360 to go, where am I at right now? Where do I want to be? Where does, if I have career aspirations, what does this actually look like? So
Mm.
for me, that starts off a great leadership program, and then the output of that can then be woven through with the participants in group sessions as well, and really making it meaningful for the leader. That individual session up front creates so much ownership and buy-in because it's about choosing their own adventure, right? Yes, we have outcomes collectively as a leadership cohort
Mm.
or group, but we're also going to tailor and target what you want to achieve personally. So I think that mix of both is really helpful.
Okay, amazing. So obviously, there's a lot of organisations where, as I mentioned earlier, where leadership development programs are sitting under your HR generalist, or there's more organisations bringing learning and development specialists into the organisation. Where does an
Mm.
external facilitator add the greatest value in that leadership development program compared to necessarily that internal delivery? And how do external experts challenge thinking and drive outcomes in a way that internal programs often can't?
I think this is one of my favorite questions that I thought you were going to ask. And I feel, and I'm sorry to all my leadership capability friends in organizations when I say that. And, if you get the right person in there, it might be a different story. But what I see happen time and time again, we're working with a few organizations on this and around this, is that that person gets sucked in to doing what the organization thinks is the best way of doing it. I think that's my overall consensus to go, oh, you know what? I actually think quite differently, and given my leadership experience, I'd like to do it this way. But you know what? If it's an internal person, then the exec team might not be so bought into it. However, if it's an outlier and someone looking at it with fresh eyes, rightly or wrongly, then you are perhaps given more permission to go disrupt than that internal position. And the other thing that I see challenging with those roles, and I hear a lot about, is that, well, I can't, the feeling that from that role is that I can't actually go into a senior leader cohort, perhaps, that we've designed training for, because they actually don't want to hear from me, who is perhaps perceived at a more junior level than that cohort group, if you like.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, look,
That might be controversial. However, I do see that play out.
I completely agree with you. And I think it's like in most things, if you are that external partner, you have a bit more scope to push back in the right way, come up with ideas where you're not necessarily governed by what comes straight down the channel. So sometimes you can drive or achieve different things as to what someone internally will potentially be nudged in a way to do as well.
Agree.
So, if you were able to talk to an HR generalist who's doing the leadership development program or an L&D specialist, because I know every interaction I have with you, your passion for training, but especially that leadership development training comes through. So, what would your tips be for those HR and L&D professionals that have been asked to create and deliver a leadership development program to a business? What would your top tricks be or top tips be that you would share with them?
I think I say this about everything, but I'm going to say this about this because I do, I think this is really important. I think you've got to be solving business problems. And another thing that I see play out, which is really interesting, you might have seen this too, Lee, in your time, is that L&D areas or HR areas will go, you know what? I think our leaders need this, this, this. Okay, cool. Have you engaged with the business on that? Is that an actual business problem to solve? How have you really determined that? So my best advice is actually speaking to the coal faces or face in organisations, the different areas, the different departments, whatever that looks like, to really understand their business challenges. And that's where you figure out where the biggest shifts are from a leadership standpoint collectively. Sure, there will be individual development plans and nuances along the way, but if you want to figure out where collective leadership performance is at, that's how you figure it out.
Amazing. So if we then reverse the table, then I'll say to you, right, so a lot of the time the work that you do, you'll be presenting to executives or leaders in an organization. What would you say, or what do you say to them about the leadership development program? What support should they give to their HR to be able to develop and deliver on point?
I think really clear outcomes. So, and they might need some help in getting that. But overall, what would be the biggest, observations that they currently have to HR around leadership performance? So I think, starting by level to go, okay, the biggest levers that we're seeing at the senior leader level might be that, they're not delegating enough and allowing the people underneath that level to grow and develop and succeed into future roles? Is it succession that is the biggest issue for us as a business? Like, I was in an organization the other day and the CEO is just like, no, there's no one near me or my skill level that actually wants to do my role, right? So then there's 100 other things I would say about that. Not 100, but I'm being dramatic. But there's a lot of things to unpack around that, which gives you where to focus from a leadership standpoint. So I think it's around observations as a starting point from the exec team to HR to go, these are the key things that we're seeing playing out, and really you're then looking as a HR practitioner or team to go, okay, well, how do we shift those things? What would be the development that lies underneath that from a capability standpoint to actually really shift, and what's the opportunity?
Okay, amazing. Now, in terms of the work that you do, I mean, obviously we're talking about leadership development program, but from an organization perspective, you guys do more than just leadership development. You've got other programs that you run as well. Do you have sort of a quick snapshot of what those other programs look like as well?
Yeah, we spend a lot of time, and we're working on a leadership onboarding, a 12-week program for a regulator right now, and it's a lot. You've got to, how we're linking onboarding and knowledge management for the general populace, but then there's got to be a leadership onboarding program as well as that to support what we're wanting to achieve. So, we play in the onboarding knowledge space. How do you think about as a leader
Yeah.
AI in your business, and really thinking how do you get the best ROI for your people or your customer or whomever around that. And we also look at future skills and succession planning as well.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Sarah, so much for joining us today. Really do
You're
appreciate you joining us to unpack this topic. It's a big one that's out there at the moment, and for your insights, your tips, and your knowledge. Really do appreciate it. And if anyone wants to jump onto Sarah's LinkedIn profile, you can follow and see the great work that her and the team at Linkable do as well. But thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Lee.
And if you are looking to grow your HR career or build your teams in 2026, whether you're searching for your next opportunity or need finding the right talent for your business, our leading recruitment experts have you covered. Well, that is it for today's session. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode.